Real quick question right off the top here. How many of you in my audience have ever heard of or have ever studied the concept of game theory? Now, it's somewhat of a generic, ambiguous term that deals with the idea of getting inside the head of the other person. Meaning, if they were given a situation that you were presented with, what would they do? And based on that, should you adjust your strategy? If they're an opponent, or if there is some type of a collective goal. It's critical to understand this if you're going to ever succeed in any kind of a survival group, because you're going to have to be able to let go of your ego for a minute and realize that other people will see things the same way as you do. Now, a huge portion of the population, especially in North America, doesn't even have the ability to comprehend these tactics and these techniques because they are narcissists. And based on that, looking at that, you can tell who has and who has not studied this particular thing. Businesses use it. Mathematicians use it to assess risk so that they can manage finances and manage the direction of where they're going. Without this, you will be hopelessly lost. Game theory. Now, here's a perfect example. You can tell that the CEO of, not necessarily Anheuser-Busch, but the person that was in charge of Bud Light, the marketing department, had never studied or never even looked at game theory. Because the risk-reward analysis was completely skewed. The types of people that would have been happy about Bud Light and the can and the controversy, all of this with this Mr. Mulvaney or whatever, they were a very small group of people that weren't really beer drinkers. But the group of people that might have taken offense at this was huge. And even if the offense was even slightly mild, which it wasn't, it was a huge backlash, you would have never made the decision regardless of your feelings. But of course, what do we know about the CEO of Bud Light? Not the CEO, the person in charge of the marketing of Bud Light who made the decision to send the cans. No logic, just simple emotions drove that decision. No thinking whatsoever. And that's what we talk about, Florida Maquis Patreon channel. Just want to say thank you to everyone. Be diligent. Those of you who show up here on a daily basis. Those of you who have stepped up over there, especially recently, we've gotten the new level rolled out by request. People said Florida Maquis. We appreciate the $1 level, but we would like a next level kind of thing beyond the training. So I said, okay, the next level up is $5. Thank you, everyone who's shown up over there. If it's not for you, regardless of whatever level you're in, fully refundable first 90 days, no questions asked. It's like going up to a candy machine, putting your money in, and getting, for that money, little samples, standing there for 90 days. And then after 90 days, hitting the coin return and having your money back. That's the level of risk at Patreon. Why can we talk about things over there? Vimeo. It is a not free private server, Vimeo, Vimeo.com. It's a private server that Google doesn't have access to. Even the folks at Google would have to literally sign up and pay to get access to the Vimeo servers. Which is why I can talk about things, and many other people use Vimeo as well, in context and show images that would likely get me demonetized or taken down completely on YouTube. But game theory, real quick, deals with systems of interacting agents where the outcome for an agent depends on the actions of all the other agents. That's basically a survival group, is it not? Deals with the systems of interacting agents, think people in your survival group, where the outcome for any one agent depends on the actions of all of the other agents. This is the idea of basically, making friends in a survival group. It's something that you're going to have to, if you're going to survive any kind of a stressful situation or end of the world grid down situation, understanding how other people will relate to certain things that you do based on how you would relate to it if they did it. That's going to be the key. It's a level of empathy that a lot of narcissists and these types, they just don't have it. They don't have the ability to deal with it. Now, what does this have to do with anything going forward? How many of you, especially ladies out there, have ever heard statements like this from a partner? You're nothing to me, and nothing without me. Don't tell me what to do. I'll tell you what to do. No one likes you. You don't even deserve me. Don't you dare think of leaving. How many of you heard the narcissist's prayer? That didn't happen. And if it did, it wasn't that bad. And well, if it was, it's not that big a deal. And if it is really that big of a deal, it's not my fault. And if it was my fault, I didn't mean it. If I did, you deserved it. That's the narcissist prayer. Now, here is, and 5 minutes, 45 seconds in, I want you guys out there to try this on your friends. Anybody you know. I want you guys to give them this scenario, and you'll be able to tell whether you're dealing with a narcissist or not, just by how they react to this particular scenario. Now, what's the scenario? You have two prisoners. They're each in separate cells, okay? And they're being questioned by different police officers, and here's the deal, independently, without talking to each other, that each of them are given. If prisoner 1 remains silent and doesn't cooperate about anything with the police, and prisoner 2 confesses, then prisoner 1 gets 20 years for remaining silent, and prisoner 2, as a reward for confessing, gets released. Now, if they both remain silent and keep their mouth shut, they each only get a year. But if they both confess, they each get 5 years. Now, what is the right course of action? Should you confess or should you remain silent? Now, remember, you're not going to know what the other person does. You're not going to have a chance to collude. What is your best course of action? Well, let's think about this for a minute. You only have two choices. If you remain silent, thinking, well, if this other guy remains silent, well, that's going to be our best case scenario. It's not the single best case scenario, but the risk of confessing, if he confesses, is 5 years. But man, if he takes the chance and he confesses and I remain silent, I'm going to get 20 years. So maybe I should confess. Well, if I confess and he's thinking like I'm thinking, the same way that he confesses, we're both going to get 5 years. So what do you do? You see, you'd think non-narcissistic person would say, you know what? I'm going to remain silent because if I assume the other person is a narcissist and they confess, which is what a narcissist would do, risking the 5 years for both. You see, it's a 50-50 shot there at between released or 5 years. Someone say, well, 20 years, that's a heck of a risk. But both people say, only a year? If I remain silent, he remains silent, we know we can both just get 1 year. See, that's somebody that has the ability to think about what the other person would do rationally. And it is the assumption, of course, that if the two were working together, they're both rational. Only an irrational person would confess, hoping against hope that the other person is just as irrational as they are, meaning they're going to take the 5 years, and if the other person is a normal person, that they're going to get the freebie. See, basically, Donald Trump would confess. Normal people would remain silent. Now, keep that same thought in mind when you read an article like this. U.S. banks halt trading as financial panic spreads. Everybody's hearing all of these stories about the banks failing in North America. These regional banks. Well, Americans think about this in American terms. But what do you think other countries look at this and think? Well, if U.S. banks are failing, I wonder what's going to happen here. Because a lot of banks in other countries Pardon me, I had a cough come out of nowhere there. Banks in other countries and financial situations in other countries see this and they're like, rats off a sinking ship. Rats off of a sinking ship. We're going to have to look elsewhere. We're going to have to look elsewhere for security. For so many years, the entire, what they call the free world, has looked to the U.S. as the guiding light of freedom and democracy and all this other nonsense. Well, guess what? Now what are they going to do? First Republic, down 67. Western Alliance, down 75. PacWest Bancorp, more and more and more failing. Well, what do? Do you stick with a loser? And then they see this. Venezuela denounces theft of the century as U.S. endorses Citgo's sale. Other countries are going to look at the U.S. as a bad bet. Even if they believe all the propaganda about freedom and democracy and all this nonsense, it's a bad bet. It's a bad bet right now. And I don't care what your preferred currency going forward is, as nations start to pull their assets out of our banks because they fear them being seized, which is exactly what happened here. Other countries are going to, I wonder when the day is going to come that we're going to say, or we're going to do something that DC isn't going to like. And then they're going to come after us. Maybe we shouldn't be involved with them. You see, Washington, D.C. doesn't have the ability to comprehend what they're doing. Because why? Because they're a bunch of narcissists. They don't have the ability to look at other people and their view of us that way. And now here, we see the exact same thing. Kayleigh McEnany has been chosen to replace Tucker Carlson. Now, a lot of people are having some real cognitive dissonance about this. Like, wait a minute. So Fox got rid of Tucker Carlson, so they don't want the truth. But they obviously are afraid of the truth. They're afraid of what's happening. This was Donald Trump's press secretary. She's actually a Floridian. Lives over in Tampa. And they've already decided to start to pile on her because she hasn't come out and vociferously endorsed Donald Trump. But wait a minute, you ready for this? This is right out of Tucker Carlson's emails. This is what's coming in the new lawsuits against Fox. There really isn't an upside to Trump. Quote, we are very, very close to being able to ignore Trump. I truly can't wait. Quote, I hate him passionately. So think about this for just a second. People are upset with Kayleigh McEnany because Kayleigh McEnany is replacing Tucker Carlson because they saw Tucker Carlson as the truth about Trump guy. This was the actual truth of Tucker Carlson behind the scenes. Now, how does this qualify as 5D chess? Donald Trump takes aim at former press secretary Kayleigh McEnany for supporting rival Ron DeSantis. Once again, all she said was, if he's going to announce, last February would have been the time to do it. That was her whole quote. And here's where this is where we can read something that not a lot of you probably have read. I think Trump has already asked DeSantis to be VP and he said no. And that's why he's attacking him. Because if you ever wanted Ron DeSantis as your VP, you wouldn't say things that you've already said about him now, letting Bannon call him all sorts of lies and make up all sorts of bullshit about Soros backing, which is provably a lie. The Soros thing is provably a lie. But these other two, Kari Lake and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they've also been talked about as possible in the Veep stakes of who would be vice president under a possible Trump run. Well, they've done polling. And you're not going to believe what the results were. It's stunning. Let's see if I can straighten this up here. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Survey of likely voters from Rasmussen Political Media found that a hypothetical presidential ticket featuring former President Donald Trump and Green would lose to Biden-Harris. Now, here's the kicker. Biden-Harris in this poll would defeat Trump-Green 44 to 40%. Now, here's the part that's going to blow your mind. Same poll. 51% of likely voters would back a Trump ticket if he brought DeSantis on as his running mate. In fact, the same poll said that if Trump picked DeSantis as his running mate, Trump-DeSantis would win the national popular vote, which the Republicans haven't done in 20 years. Now, why would, if it was I'm sure a lot of people are already typing, well, you know, those polls, they make them up to make Democrats look good. That doesn't make Democrats look good here. This poll actually says that if DeSantis was on the ticket, even the lower name on the ticket, that it would convince huge amounts of middle-of-the-road people to either not vote at all for Biden or to vote for them. 51-43, the difference between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Ron DeSantis, from 40% to 51%, 11-point jump, including the national popular vote. Now, the last one they ran was Trump Kari Lake, and apparently with Kari Lake, 47-42, they win, but they don't take the national popular vote. Now, here's the absolute crazy part about that. Hasn't Bannon, been out running his mouth about how the huge failure of Ron DeSantis' global tour and how it shows he's just not prepared. He's not ready to step up on the national stage and do what's necessary. Really? Kari Lake has never served one day in public office ever. She's a news personality. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has had one term as a rep in D.C. And even then, she's a big enough drag on the ticket to bring Trump down because of the way she goes about things. And what's that way? What am I talking about? It goes back to game theory. This idea of survival apocalypse, getting a group together that can affect good long-term survival. You need to learn how to not make enemies when it's not necessary. There are certain times just zipping your lip and just letting it go is the best course of action. There's a wonderful video. I forget how long ago it was. It was, I believe, it was Patriot Nurse. Want a happy life? Avoid these 4 people. And the very first group of people that she says to avoid is people who don't control their mouth. Next group is people prone to anger, people who are characterized by jealousy or addictions or all sorts of other problems. She goes through all this. And now we can see. You see, I've talked about people making friends and people having a survival group. Who remembers The Walking Dead, where they ran into an enemy group? Only one person in the main group with Rick and Michonne and all those people decided, you know what, I'm going to reach out across the table to what we perceive to be an enemy. And I'm going to attempt to mend fences. And I'm going to attempt to work with this guy. I mean, we have a lot that we disagree on. But I'm going to go and I'm going to extend the olive branch. Go and have a drink. And I mean, we know how this worked out with Andre and the governor, but it was still the right move. It was still the right decision to make. game theory. It's going to be critical going forward. And like I said, run this by some friends. Run this idea of the prisoner dilemma by your friends. Because you'll be able to tell real fast who the selfish narcissists are, who you might want to distance yourself from, and who maybe you hadn't considered before. Maybe bring that person in. So I will leave it there. But once again, God bless every one of you. Thank you so much for being here, especially those of you over at Patreon, making a huge difference in my life. Absolutely amazing. God bless you. Have a great weekend. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you guys next time.